The judge had already made up her mind. You could tell by the way she barely looked up when Delia Owens walked into courtroom 7 that Tuesday morning. No briefcase, no legal pad, just a manila envelope held flat against her chest like she was carrying something fragile, something she didn't want to break. The bailiff almost didn't let her through. "Ma'am, this area is for counsel only." "I know," Delia said. "I am counsel." He looked at her the way people had been looking at her for 3 months. The way you look at someone who's wandered into the wrong room and doesn't know it yet. She was 44 years old, wearing a gray blazer she'd bought at Goodwill the week before, and she smelled faintly of the cleaning chemicals she'd spent the last 6 years working with on night shifts at Harmon Regional Hospital. She did not look like a lawyer. She did not look like someone who belonged in that room. She sat down anyway. Her husband, Terrence Owens, had been in a holding cell 2 floors below since 6 that morning. He'd been there, in one facility or another, for the last 14 months. Ever since the night a Parkfield County detective named Langford had shown up at their front door and told Terrence he needed to come answer a few questions about the fire at Kellner Storage on Route 9. That fire had killed one man, a night security guard named Dwayne Pratt, and destroyed nearly $2 million in property belonging to a man named Curtis Hale, who happened to be one of the largest commercial landlords in Parkfield County, and who happened to play golf every Sunday with the county DA. Terrence had told Langford he'd never been to Kellner Storage in his life. Langford had arrested him 4 days later. The case against Terrence Owens was, on paper, almost airtight. A former coworker, a man named Briggs, who Terrence had reported to HR for stealing materials from a job site, testified that Terrence had talked about Hale, about hating the man, about what he deserved. A gas station receipt put Terrence's truck 2 miles from the storage facility on the night of the fire, and a cell tower ping had placed his phone in the vicinity at 11:47 p.m. Less than 30 minutes before Kellner Storage went up like a matchbook. The public defender assigned to Terrence's case was a 29-year-old named Moss, who had 17 other active cases, and who had met with Terrence exactly 3 times before trial. He had told Delia, gently but directly, that the best realistic outcome was a plea deal, 12 years, possibility of parole in 8. Terrence would be 60 when he got out. Their daughter, Camille, would be grown. Their son, Theo, would be in college. Terrence had refused the deal. "I didn't do this," he told Moss. "I am not going to say that I did." Moss had looked at Delia when Terrence said that, the way people look at a wife when they need her to be the reasonable one. And Delia had looked back at Moss and said, very quietly, "Then we better find something." What most people didn't know about Delia Owens, what the bailiff didn't know, what Langford certainly didn't know, what even Moss hadn't bothered to ask, was that before the hospital, before the night shifts, before Camille and Theo and the small house on Brentwood Court, Delia had spent 8 years working as a paralegal at Creston and Falk, one of the better civil litigation firms in the state. She had left when Camille was born because the hours were impossible and the pay wasn't worth the childcare, and because Terrence was working construction and things had been fine. Things had been fine for a long time. She had not forgotten what she learned at Creston and Falk. She had not forgotten how to read a discovery file, how to find the thread that didn't belong, how to sit with a document until it told you what it was actually saying. For 14 months, while working nights and raising 2 kids and driving 40 minutes each way to visit Terrence on weekends, Delia Owens had read every page of the prosecution's case. 3 times, sometimes 4. The gas station receipt was real. Terrence's truck had been on Route 12 that night. He'd told her that from the beginning. He'd been driving back from his brother's place in Caldwell, and Route 12 passed within 2 miles of Kellner Storage, same as it passed within 2 miles of the hospital, the Walmart distribution center, and approximately 14,000 other places in Parkfield County. Nobody had asked why he was on Route 12. They'd just noted that he was close. The cell tower ping was real, too. But Delia had requested the full tower data, not just the ping the prosecution entered into evidence, but the raw log from the carrier. It had taken her 6 weeks and 2 formal records requests to get it. When she finally opened the file, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The tower that had pinged Terrence's phone at 11:47 p.m. served a radius of nearly 4 miles. The prosecution had presented it as placing him near the fire. What they had not mentioned, what was sitting right there in the raw carrier log on page 11 in a column labeled sector, was that the ping had come from the northwest sector of that tower. Kellner storage was to the southeast. The northwest sector pointed directly toward the Caldwell Highway, the road Terrence had said he was on, the road that led back from his brother's house. Delia had stared at that column for a long time. Then she had taken out a legal pad and started writing. Moss had not taken it seriously at first. He was polite about it. He was always polite, which was one of the more frustrating things about him. But he'd told her that tower sector data was technical, that juries didn't respond well to technical evidence, that the prosecution would just bring in their own expert to complicate it. "Then we bring in our own expert first," Delia said. "Mrs. Owens, I don't have the budget to. I found one. He'll testify for $800. He used to work for the carrier." Moss had gone quiet. "I'll pay for it," she said. She had pulled the money from what was left of their emergency fund. She had not told Terrence, because Terrence would have told her not to. The expert's name was Calloway. He was 56, retired, and he had the manner of a man who found courtrooms only slightly less tedious than he found everything else. But he knew cell tower data the way a carpenter knows wood grain, and when Delia walked him through what she'd found, he looked at her for a moment and said, "You read the sector column." "I did. Most people don't read the sector column." "I know." He agreed to testify. Moss had filed the motion to introduce the tower data and Calloway's testimony 3 weeks before trial. The prosecution had objected. The judge, the Honorable Sandra Whitmore, who had been on the bench in Parkfield County for 19 years and who had, in Delia's estimation, decided this case approximately 8 minutes after the indictment came down, had initially denied the motion. Delia had written the appeal herself. She had sat at the kitchen table from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. on a Thursday, drafting and redrafting, finding precedents, citing case law she'd remembered from Creston and Falk, and verified through the county law library's online database. When she was done, she printed it, read it twice, found 2 errors, corrected them, and printed it again. Moss had filed it under his name, as was required. But when Judge Whitmore read it, she had looked up from the document and said to Moss, "This is good work, counselor." And Moss, to his credit, had said, "My client's wife wrote most of it, Your Honor." The judge had paused at that, just a beat, then she'd moved on. She granted the motion. The morning of trial, the prosecution's lead attorney, a man named Langford Healy, which was a coincidence Delia had noticed and filed away, gave an opening statement that was precise and confident and designed to make Terrence Owens sound like a man capable of watching another human being burn to death over a grudge about commercial real estate. He used words like calculated and deliberate. He showed the jury a photograph of the storage facility, blackened and collapsed, and he let them sit with it. Then Moss stood up. He read from the statement Delia had written for him almost word for word, which she had anticipated and was grateful for. He told the jury that the case against Terrence Owens rested on 2 pieces of evidence that were being presented as something they were not. He told them to pay attention, because the truth was in the details. He told them that a man's life was in their hands, and that the least they could owe him was their full attention. Delia sat in the gallery behind the defense table. She did not look at the jury. She watched the judge. Briggs testified on the second day. He was confident on direct examination, told the story of Terrence's anger about Curtis Hale clearly, smoothly, like he'd practiced it, which he probably had. He described Terrence saying Hale had cost him a contract, that he'd never forgive him, that someone ought to make him understand what it felt like to lose something. On cross, Moss asked Briggs about the HR complaint. Briggs acknowledged it. Moss asked if Briggs had been terminated from the job site shortly after the complaint was filed. Briggs said yes, but that it was unrelated. Moss didn't push it further. They'd agreed not to, because Delia had told him that the jury would make the connection themselves and that pushing it would look desperate. The jury made the connection. She could see it in the way two of them shifted in their seats. The gas station receipt was stipulated. Terrence's truck had been on Route 12. No one disputed it. The prosecution made it sound like proximity was the same as presence. Moss said, in his quiet, undramatic way, that Route 12 was the most direct path between Caldwell and Brentwood Court, and that Terrence's brother would confirm he'd been in Caldwell that evening, which the brother did. Then Calloway took the stand. He was exactly as Delia had expected. Dry, technical, slightly impatient with the pace at which laypeople processed information. But he was clear. He put up a diagram of the tower's coverage sectors. He explained that a cell phone ping records not just which tower it connects to, but which face of that tower, which direction the signal came from. He pointed to the northwest sector. He put up a map showing Kellner's storage to the southeast. He said plainly that the prosecution's cell tower evidence did not place Terrence Owens near the fire. It placed him on the road going home. Langford Healy's cross-examination lasted 40 minutes. He used words like approximate and variable. He suggested that sector data was imprecise, that towers could behave unpredictably, that the northwest sector had some overlap with areas to the east. Calloway agreed that there was a margin of variation. He said the margin was roughly 15 degrees. He said Kellner's storage was 94 degrees outside the center point of that sector. He said this in the same flat, unbothered tone he'd said everything else, and then he waited for the next question. There wasn't one. Delia did not cry when the jury came back. She had decided she wouldn't, and she was someone who kept her decisions. The foreperson read the verdict. Not guilty on arson, not guilty on felony murder, and Terrence sat very still for a moment and then put his face in his hands. Moss put a hand on his shoulder. The gallery made a sound that wasn't quite noise, more like a collective exhale. Langford Healy gathered his files without looking at anyone. Judge Whitmore thanked the jury and began the process of remanding Terrence Owens from custody, which took another 40 minutes, because everything in the legal system takes longer than it should. During those 40 minutes, Delia sat in the gallery and did not move. A woman in the row behind her, a stranger, someone who'd wandered in to watch, leaned forward and said, "Is that your husband?" "Yes," Delia said. "Did you know he'd be okay?" Delia thought about 14 months of night shifts and discovery files and the kitchen table at 4 in the morning. She thought about the sector column on page 11. She thought about Camille, who was 15 now, and who had spent a year and a half explaining to her friends at school where her father was. She thought about Theo, who was 12 and who had stopped talking much after the arrest, who had started again slowly when Delia had told him what she'd found in the cell tower data. "I knew what I found," she said. "That's all." Terrence was released at 2:17 in the afternoon. They stood outside the courthouse in the October cold, and he put his arms around her and didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing to say that covered it. Later, Camille and Theo were there, and there was food, and there was noise, and there was the particular chaos of a family putting itself back together in real time. 6 weeks after the verdict, Terrence's attorneys, a civil firm Delia had found, working on contingency, filed a wrongful prosecution claim against Parkfield County. The claim cited the prosecution's failure to disclose the full cell tower sector data in initial discovery, which Delia had documented carefully every step of the way. Detective Langford retired at the end of the year. The DA's office declined to comment. The civil case is still pending. I've told you this story because I think you already know what it means. You've felt some version of it. Maybe not in a courtroom, maybe not with this much at stake, But you've been in a room where someone decided you weren't worth listening to before you opened your mouth. You've watched a system move forward with certainty when the truth was sitting right there, in a column no one bothered to read. What Delia Owens did wasn't magic. It wasn't a dramatic moment where everything clicked into place. It was 14 months of showing up, reading carefully, and refusing to accept that the story was already over. The sector column was on page 11. It had been there the whole time. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. If someone handed you that file, if the answer to saving someone you loved was buried somewhere in 400 pages of technical documents you'd never seen before, would you read every page? I think you would. I think most people would if the stakes were real enough. The question is whether we wait until the stakes are that high to start paying attention.